When we think about what it means to be a good parent, our minds usually jump to the essentials, right? A safe home, good food on the table, a solid education. But what if the most important things we give our kids aren't things we can buy at all? What if the really crucial investments are the ones we can't even see? Okay, so here's where we're headed. First, we're going to uncover two of these sort of hidden investments in parenting. Then, we'll get into the real cost of overlooking them and try to figure out why that even happens. We'll also take a look at how parenting has changed over time, and then finally land on how we can find the right balance in today's crazy world. So let's just dive right in. In our race to be the best parents we can possibly be, what are the things we might be unintentionally leaving out of the picture? It's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming. It's something every single parent asks themselves. For a long, long time, the answer seemed kind of straightforward, and it really centered on a few concrete things. Yeah, for generations, being a good parent basically meant focusing on these big three: putting food on the table, making sure the family was financially stable, and just looking after your kids' physical health. And of course, all of this is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation of a child's life. But here's the thing. What researchers are starting to see is that by focusing so much on the physical and financial, we've kind of created a blind spot. We're overlooking the investments that actually build a child's inner world, their resilience, their confidence, their very sense of who they are. The first of these is what we'll call mental investment. And we're not just talking about therapy here. This is about building up their mental muscle. It's about giving our kids the tools they need to bounce back from a bad grade, to manage the anxiety before a big game, and just to navigate the messy, chaotic, beautiful journey of growing up. And the second one is emotional investment. This is the bedrock of a child's self-worth. It's all about nurturing their self-esteem with love and security so they actually learn how to build healthy, stable relationships of their own later on. So, what happens when these invisible investments aren't there? And that brings us to the really serious side of this, the consequences. Because when these emotional and mental investments aren't made, the impact isn't just a theory in a book. It's very real, and it can last a lifetime. You can really see on this slide how it all creates this kind of domino effect. A lack of that mental investment, it's directly linked to struggles in school. And that can make it so much harder to adjust to the demands of being an adult. It can even lead to really severe issues like eating disorders and self-harm. It's exactly the same story for a lack of emotional investment. It's honestly heartbreaking to think about, but kids who don't get that foundational support often grow into adults who really struggle with their self-worth, which makes it incredibly difficult to form the deep, meaningful connections that we all need. Okay, so if the stakes are this high, why on earth does this keep happening? Let's take a look at some of the reasons why. The research seems to point to a few key factors. Sometimes it starts with parents who are just too young, who are still figuring out their own emotional world when they have kids. Or if there isn't a real, genuine connection between the parents, it's almost impossible to team up and meet a child's emotional needs. And finally, there's this really powerful cycle at play. Take a look at this number, 60.89. So what is that? Well, in South Africa in 2022, for every 1,000 teenage girls, almost 61 of them became mothers. And that isn't just a statistic. It's a story about young people who are still growing up themselves and who might not have the emotional resources to provide that crucial investment for their own kids. And this quote right here, it just nails that third cause we mentioned. We basically learn how to parent from our own parents. We soak up their behaviors, their beliefs, their habits, the good stuff and the bad, and we often end up carrying those same patterns into our own families without even realizing it. So all of this brings us to a really fascinating question. How have our ideas about parenting actually changed over the years? And are we really doing any better? Let's look at a tale of two styles. I mean, the simple truth is, the world has changed. A lot. 50 years ago, a kid's world was pretty small. Their main influences were parents, teachers, and maybe a few friends down the street. But today, with social media, the internet, a 24/7 news cycle, kids are navigating a level of pressure that previous generations just never had to deal with. So let's compare the two big models. On one hand, you have the traditional authoritarian style. This was all about rules and respect. It was often super strict, and the main focus was on providing for the family financially. On the other hand, you have the modern authoritative style. This one's all about connection and communication. Parents are warm, they're responsive, and they're deeply involved in their kids' emotional lives. But
And this is a really important point. This modern style isn't some kind of magic bullet. All that high-level involvement can sometimes backfire. It can create this intense pressure for kids to be perfect. And it can also lead to a situation where kids get so used to their parents' approval that they really struggle to make decisions on their own.
So if the old way is out of touch with the modern world, and the new way has its own set of problems, where does that leave us? Well, that brings us to the path forward, finding the right balance. Really, the key takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The old authoritarian model, with its focus on rules, can feel really cold and distant to kids today. But the authoritative model, with its big emphasis on feelings, can sometimes lack the structure that actually helps kids feel safe. The ideal path, it seems, is a really thoughtful blend of both. So what does that actually look like? Well, think of it like a two-step. First, you lead with the heart of the modern style. Warmth, connection, and real emotional support. But then you bring in the spine of the old school style. Clear, consistent boundaries, and meaningful discipline. It's about being both a soft place to land and a steady hand to guide. And that leaves us with one last thought. We spend so much time and energy planning for our kids' financial future, saving for college, setting up accounts. What if we brought that exact same level of planning, that same long-term thinking, to their emotional and mental well-being? Because at the end of the day, that might just be the most valuable inheritance we could ever give them.